startups. So with that, first, Deepak doesn't need any introduction, and especially not from me. Deepak is as we were talking at lunch, he's come full circle. He started off his career as a medical doctor, and now he's a pioneer in integrative health and medicine, combining Western medicine with, which we think of now as traditional, with meditation and mindfulness. He has written over 80 books, and many of you are holding his most recent book called Super Genes with Dr. Rudy Tanzi from Harvard. My wife, Francine, who's there, and I start the day off with a guided meditation from Deepak, and so he's very present in our lives. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Deepak Chopra.
Thanks, Ravi, and thanks to Sumant for organizing this for me, and thank you all for attending. So I'm going to actually show you a video that's about 3-4 minutes, and then we'll go from there. So this is how all of you showed up. And it happened very quickly after your father and mother looked at each other with that gleam of desire. Where were you before that? You existed as a possibility. And then that one cell, it took about 200 million sperm to reach that one cell. One of them made it. And so biologists constantly wonder why it takes 200 million sperm to fertilize one egg. The only explanation I have is that guys don't like to stop for directions. But in any case, one of them made it. And as soon as that happened, the fertilized ovum created a little protein that blocked entry to all the other sperm. There were 23,000 genes, approximately, in that fertilized single cell. And there were 6 billion molecules of DNA. So think of DNA as a letter in a language. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. And there are only 4 letters that are responsible for all life. Okay, so once again, deoxyribonucleic acid. There are 4 base pairs that are known as adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine. In short, A, T, C, and G. So A, T, C, and G, 4 letters, make all of life. And that includes the life of a mosquito, a dolphin, an elephant, a chimpanzee, a giraffe. Think of it, any insect, Shakespeare, Mozart, Einstein, all it takes is 4 letters. 6 billion letters, out of which 23,000 genes were made, which means there's a lot of what seems redundancy. Because what is a gene as opposed to DNA? Gene is a stretch of DNA that codes for a protein or a unit of heredity. So we say genes for blonde hair, blue eyes, etc., etc. Only 23,000 genes, by the way, to make a human being. Potatoes have more genes than you have. So what's going on? And until recently, the 6 billion base pairs of DNA were considered junk DNA. But biologists don't use that term anymore. They call it intergenic DNA. So what the intergenic DNA does, if you think of the DNA as the alphabet, the gene as the word, think of the intergenic DNA as the grammar, the punctuation. So as the story is being written, the story how to create a human being, the intergenic DNA is actually punctuating the story by switching genes on and off, okay, or regulating the activity of the genes. So some genes are going to differentiate into eyes, some into brain, some into hair follicles, some into genitalia, etc. It takes only 50 replications, to create a human being. So by the end of 50 replications, that one cell has become 100 trillion cells, which is more than all the stars in the Milky Way galaxy. And each cell has differentiated into a different organ from that one cell. And what's doing it? It's self-organizing itself. It's self-evolving. And during the 9 months that it takes to make a baby, the genes remember the history of existence on this planet, going back 2.8 billion years of recapitulation. If you watch that video very carefully, you'll see that a human fetus first looks like a fish, then like an amphibian, then like a reptile, then like a bird, goes through all the stages. In other words, your genes encode the memory of life on this planet going by 2.8 billion years when the first genes appeared in microorganisms on the rims of volcanoes on our planet. This is an unbroken chain of existence. So those primitive organs are still there as memory in your genes. And of course, as mammals, we remember all of the expressions and learning and experiences of all mammals in that 9 months of recapitulation. As I said, this is unbroken. If there was one ancestor along the way that wasn't in the mood, we wouldn't be having this conversation. This one unbroken chain of life. Now, as you come out of the mother's birth canal, until then it's all human genes. But as you come out of the mother's birth canal, and even if it's a cesarean section, but particularly when the baby is born through natural means, the baby ingests the mother's vaginal secretions, swallows them and inhales them. And then, of course, the entire skin is also embedded with the mother's secretions. And this embeds into the human body 3.3 extra genes, which are not human. So you have 23,000 genes, which are human, but 3.3 million genes that come from bacteria. And this is called the microbiome. So now the baby is here with the microbiome, 23,000 genes, 6 billion alphabets, mostly intergenic, and 3.3 million bacterial genes. And as the baby is exposed to the world through sound, touch, sight, taste, and smell, through emotions, through contact with family and friends, there's further exchange of microbiomes. So there's horizontal transmission and vertical transmission. And then the experiences that the baby is having, including emotional experiences, they start to influence the gene to make a set of proteins that are now called the epigenome. Epi because it's above the gene. Okay, so the epigenome is a sheet of proteins that results as the activity of the genes in response to experience, every experience. Now the epigenome, which is actually created by the gene, then regulates the activity of the genes. And so we are a complex integrated activity of genes, microbiome, and epigenes and intergenic DNA, all coming from that one cell. It's important to remember that this is an activity, this is not a thing. And ultimately, it's an activity of the total universe, because the carbon, the hydrogen, the oxygen, nitrogen that makes the DNA was manufactured in the crucible of stars. So the carbon in your fingernails may come from a different star, even a different galaxy, than the nitrogen in your skin or in your brain. It takes the entire universe. You and I are a 14 billion years of cosmic evolution. And of course, with climate change and all the other things we're doing to our planet, we might blow it all up. 14 billion years of cosmic evolution. How is this practical? So here's this diagram that shows you what the super gene is. It's the microbiome, genome, and epigenome. This conversation started with Rudy Tanzi, who's a neurogeneticist at Harvard Medical School. Mike has sponsored a lot of his work in Alzheimer's. And I met Rudy at a TED Med conference in the men's room, and we were both in neighboring urinals. And I said, Rudy, are genes a noun or a verb? I swear to God, he stopped what he was doing. And he said, let's go outside and speak. And that started our friendship through emails, ended up in Super Brain and Super Genes. So let's think of the biological activity of an organism, which is the activity of the supergene, the microbiome, the genome, the epigenome, that orchestrates the activity that we call our body. So in every 24 hours, we're experiencing the world through our senses. We are sleeping, waking, nutrition, eating, breathing, digestion, metabolism, elimination, sensory experience, and the inner world of thoughts, emotions, memories, desires, insight, intuition, imagination, creativity. This is the dynamic activity of seeming non-change in the midst of change, which biologists refer to as homeostasis or self-regulation. So a human body, when it's in its pristine condition, as a baby, is an example of total self-regulation in harmony with its so-called environment. It is by understanding this that we can understand the dynamics of well-being. Our science has focused on the body as a mechanistic, physical entity, and the best that science can do today is interfere with mechanisms of disease. So, we know how bacteria multiply. We interfere with them with antibiotics to get rid of infections. We know how cancer cells replicate. We interfere with them through chemotherapy and radiation and other strategies. But I think you'll realize that mechanisms of illness are not the origins of illness, and the origins of illness are certainly not the origins of well-being, which is my area of interest. So with this particular understanding, we can look at how we can reinterpret the body and reinvent the body, literally, when we understand how it really operates. The body is a process, it's a verb, it's not a structure. DNA is not a structure, it's an activity. Genes are not structures, they are activities, they are verbs. Your body is also, similarly, not a thing. Your physical body, for example, the one you're using right now to listen to my lecture, is not the one you came in with a little while ago when you came into this room. Even with one breath, you breathe in 10 to the power of 22 atoms that you take in from the environment. With every breath, you breathe out 10 to the power of 22 atoms that have their origin in every cell of your body. So at the atomic level, you're breathing out bits and pieces of your heart and kidney and brain tissue. And technically speaking, we're intimately sharing our organs with each other all the time. The great American poet Walt Whitman said, every atom that belongs to you as well belongs to me. So you might own your automobile or your investment account, but you do not own your body. We can actually show mathematically that right this moment, in your physical body, you have 1 million atoms that were once in the body of Jesus or Buddha or Michelangelo or Saddam Hussein. In just the last 3 weeks, a quadrillion atoms have gone through your body that have gone through the body of every other living species on this planet. So who are you as a physical body? You're the recycling of planetary dust and water and air, and ultimately of cosmic dust as carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. This physical body that I'm using right now to give you this lecture is my 2015 model. Last time I came to the Four Seasons in Silicon Valley, I brought the same suitcase, even the same suit, but not the same physical body. So if you think you are your physical body, you have a problem. Which one are you speaking of? The body is like a river of change and seeming non-change at the same time. And this is an old idea. Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher, said, no man can step into the same river twice because it's a new man and it's a new river. So who is stepping into the body? Another way to look at the body is as an energy and information field. arising out of this quantum field that we call the field of all possibilities, okay, which could very well be a field of consciousness. This information is totally new. The gene expression is influenced by thoughts, emotions, personal relationships, social interactions, environment, and also how we interpret experience, any experience. Because experience ultimately is an interpretation. What people call stress is an interpretation. Stress is the memory of some experience in the past that was interpreted as traumatic, or some anticipated experience in the future. The fund may fail, or something like that. And it causes epigenetic changes that influence gene mutations, literally. So it's interpretation. Let's say you're in love with a girl and you say to her, I love you, and she throws her arms around you, opens a bottle of champagne and says, I love you too. You'll make oxytocin, dopamine immediately through epigenetic modulations of your genes. But if she says, sorry, I'm dating somebody else, you won't make dopamine. You'll make adrenaline and cortisol, and your body will go into inflammation. All because of an interpretation. So now we know this. We can prove this in the lab. The gene expression is what is important, and it's done through these epigenetic mechanisms. We also know that we can change the rewiring and rewire our brains through how we experience life. In fact, there are 3 parts to our brain, our brain is also created by the genes, of course. So gene expression and brain wiring are influenced by how we experience life. There are 3 parts to our brain. One is called the reptilian brain, which is about 300 million years old. So if I hold my hand like this is a side view of the brain. This is the midbrain, which is found in reptiles. And if you go close to a reptile and you make a sudden sound or a noise, the reptile will either attack you or it will slither away. In a reptile's brain, this is called the startle response. In humans, this is called the stress response, or the fight or flight response, which is a natural reaction for survival of the reptilian brain. If I open my hand, you'll see where my thumb is. Buried inside my cortex is my limbic brain. The limbic brain is also called the mammalian brain. It's found in mammals, and mammals are so called because of the word mama, which is the origin of the word mother, and mammary, which is breast. So mammals, unlike reptiles, they don't lay eggs, they give birth to babies, they bond with their babies through emotions and through the tone of voice, body language, facial expression, eye movements, which is what a baby picks up. It doesn't know verbal language, it picks up emotional language, and that causes the wiring of the limbic brain, which regulates all the self-repair mechanisms through the hypothalamus and pituitary of the biological organism. This is only in mammals, by the way. So all mammals sing, they play, they coo, they cuddle, they sing songs, and they create families, and they nurse their young, and they defend their tribe, so to speak. They defend their families, and this is because of the emotional connection that we have of others through our limbic brain. If the experience is love, compassion, joy, empathy, and equanimity, that's a healthy limbic brain. If for some reason the child does not experience that and feels stress, then that leads to anxiety and fear and hostility and anger and guilt and shame and mistrust and insecurity, along with the reptilian brain that causes immense stress, causes inflammation in the brain, and epigenetic modifications and mutations of genes. So what's a mutation? A mutation is an error, a variation in the gene. It's like a spelling mistake, it's like a typo. Now what we've learned in the last 13 years is only 5% of disease-related gene mutations are fully penetrant. These are actually quite rare. So of all the mutations that are responsible for cancer, only 5% are fully penetrant. Of all the mutations that are responsible for autoimmune disease, all the mutations responsible for heart disease, Alzheimer's, diabetes, you name it, only 5% are fully penetrant. So if someone gets Alzheimer's before the age of 50, that's probably a fully penetrant mutation. If they get it later in life, that is influenced by epigenetics. Epigenetics means lifestyle experience. That's true of cancer, that's true of every disease we know, and yet the main bulk of our research goes where? In those 5% of fully penetrant gene mutations, which we don't understand. You can change your relationship with time. This is a very important point here because it has very practical implications, which is that time actually does not exist as an experience. Time exists only in imagination. I challenge you to experience the past right now, except in imagination. Or challenge you to experience the future right now, except in imagination. The only time is now. And now is an experience in being. It's not a thought. So if I ask you right now, as you're listening to me, just turn your attention to who's listening. And the awareness that you find yourself in is not in time. Only thought is in time. And how we experience time actually influences how we age. There are people saying, I have no time, internal dialogue. How do you have, I'm running out of time actually. How do you run out of something that doesn't exist? And yet, this imagination creates a metabolism that is the metabolism of time that influences how we age. So if somebody says, I have no time, I'm running out of time, you'll find they have higher blood pressure, they have jittery platelets, their body is inflamed, high levels of inflammatory markers, everything's in the past state. And when they suddenly drop dead of a heart attack, then they have a run out of time. So awareness is the key to all this. And here are the 5 pillars that are most influential in altering gene expression. Sleep not induced by drugs or alcohol, but real sleep. It's when the body renews itself. I remember when I was training as a resident, one night I woke up to go to the bathroom and I heard my nurse and she was waking up a patient. She said, Mr. Smith, will you please wake up? I have to give you your sleeping pill. So I went up to her. I said, you're waking up the patient to give him a sleeping pill? She said, yes, because I know he'll wake up soon. And then he'll wake me up and I'll wake you up. I said, please give him the sleeping pill. So that was our training, okay? Afterwards, I realized that 85 to 90% of the drugs we use in the hospital are for 5 conditions, all related to stress. The first is pain, the second is anxiety, the third is nausea, the fourth is insomnia, and the fifth is constipation. And if you want to remember, the acronym is PANIC, pain, anxiety, nausea, and they're all related to stress. So the second is meditation and stress management. The third is movement, at least 10,000 steps a day. But now we are discovering the neural pathways and what happens in yoga and breathing exercises. So in the yogic tradition, there are over 100 pranayams, different ways to breathe, and they all have very specific effects on our microbiome, on our genome, and on the epigenome, and we can now actually map out these pathways. In fact, today, a new movement is arising in the pharmacological industry called bioelectrical medicine, where they're trying to map out and stimulate electrically or electromagnetically the neural pathways for self-repair mechanisms. I met with the R&D chief of one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world, and I said, you know, we can show how you can stimulate these nerves through yoga and pranayama. He says, I know that, but how do we make money? He was right. the money is to be made in the electrical devices that will soon appear for stimulating the nerves that we can also stimulate through yoga and pranayama. And for severe cases, actually, that might be a big revolution. Emotions, as I said, regulate in food. Food meaning food that is not contaminated by antibiotics, steroids, hormones, chemicals, pesticides, GMO, because that's all petroleum products. And our food now, which is manufactured, refined, processed, comes from factories, contains contaminants that basically destroy the microbiome and the activity of the genome. In fact, most manufactured food has the equivalent of Agent Orange, which was used in the killing fields of Vietnam, and it's in our food. 30% of the microbiome has disappeared in the Western world. And as a result, we have the new epidemic of degenerative diseases. So is this all theory? Oh, this is a little bit about epigenetics. I'm not going to go into details, but your DNA is wrapped around those proteins that look like little circles. And those proteins are influenced by diet, lifestyle, environment, drugs, development in the womb, and childhood. And now through animal experiments, we know that this influence can go for many generations, the epigenetic influence. What about humans? There's data that the children of Holocaust victims have memories in their genes that go back to the traumatic incidents. In fact, there's data now, the children born after 9/11, if there was very traumatic, especially living in New York during that time, if the mother was pregnant, the epigenetic trauma can be seen as marks on the DNA. They're called methylation, demethylation, and so on. So they're actually chemical marks as a result of the traumatic experience. Okay, so this brings me to our study, which has been completed, which involved these institutions. Elizabeth Blackburn, who is a Nobel laureate from UCSF and recently appointed president of the Salk Institute of Biology, so she's going to be a neighbor. Rudy Tanzi, who's the co-author of Super Genes. Eric Schott from Mount Sinai. Myself and Paul Mills from UCSD, and the Chopra Center. And we have a retreat that we conduct for 7 days, a meditation retreat. And we invited Elizabeth Blackburn to present, to actually come and look at the blood samples of people who are going through the retreat. And what she found, and this is the first time this has been seen, is that there was a 40% increase in telomerase activity in people who were doing daily meditation. So telomeres, this little orange button that you see at the end of the chromosome, is something that shortens as we grow old, and when it gets to a certain shortened length, the whole chromosome falls apart, which is the basis of biological death, in the absence of disease. So we have a biological clock that is regulated by genes and this enzyme went up by 40% in less than 5 days. So at this point, we looked at the whole blood samples and we sent them to all our collaborators. And this is from Eric Schott's lab in Mount Sinai, where he looked at the entire genome through a method called transcriptome analysis, RNA sequencing. And what he found, with all the genes that are responsible for self-regulation and healing, they went up. Some of them 17-fold over baseline. All the genes that are responsible for susceptibility to heart disease, diabetes, and Alzheimer's went down, and many-fold. So much so that Eric, at a science conference, he said, we have a signature now for those who practice meditation, a biological genetic signature. So another scientist in the audience said, Dr. Schott, do you meditate? He said, no. Do you plan to meditate? He said, no. I said, but you just showed us this data. He said, yes, I'm going to figure out how to make a drug out of this. And you know, he wasn't kidding, by the way, because now I find that all the scientists are arguing about who has the IPs for this research. Because once you know what the IPs are, you can actually figure out the metabolic pathways and create new drugs. Okay, so what are we up to now? As a result of this research, we also, yes, we did digital monitoring of heart activity and brain activity. So actually, as of today, the Journal of the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine, there's a special issue on biofields. What's a biofield? A biofield is a bioelectrical field that biological organisms have around them, created by them through their heart and brain and cell activity. There's no living organism that doesn't have a biofield. The human biofield can be measured about 10 feet from where you are. So right now, you're all producing a biofield, and your state of consciousness is determining the coherence of that biofield. So if you feel peaceful, if you feel love, compassion, joy, equanimity, then your biofield is very coherent. All our biofields are creating interference patterns with each other. So the interference patterns of the biofield in this room actually reflect the collective mood of people in this room. So now there's a biological explanation when you say, I went into this room and the atmosphere was really tense. Well, because of the interference patterns created by the biofields. Or you say, I went to this holy shrine, this cathedral, and I felt awe, inspiration, joy, sacred space. Well, a coherent biofield. So these are digital technologies that are helping us identify biofields, and this is through Eric Topol, who is our collaborator at Scripps, who is looking at digital cardiology and digital neuroscience. And this paper, our first paper, was recently published in the Journal of Frontiers of Human Neuroscience. Again, there's digital signatures of consciousness here. What happened? And this is our current study, which is looking now, going beyond meditation into the different aspects of influencing the biology through some of the things that I mentioned. So this is called Self-Directed Biological Transformation Initiative, which looks at herbalized massage, which influences both the microbiome on the skin and the gut. Yoga, breathing exercises, the identifying of neural pathways, Ayurvedic herbs, which have been known as adaptogens, but now we recognize they influence gene expression, a plant-based diet, and what we call conscious communication. This is the study. People come for a week. Mike has been to one of these programs, and they go through an experience that promotes self-healing through the restoration of homeostasis, through the restoration of circadian rhythms, by the way, for which technology is already available in the form of light therapy, meditation, a plant-based diet, Ayurvedic massage, cleansing, detox, and sensory modulation through the five senses. This data is not yet available, although it is becoming available, but it's in the terabytes. So we have trillions of bytes of data. And looking at everything from lipidomics to metabolomics to the microbiome of the gut, RNA expression, digital technology, metabolomics, mitochondrial DNA health, oxidative stress. It takes supercomputers, and it's very expensive research. So it's not easy to do this, involving 7 institutions with their different areas of expertise. So Massachusetts General Hospital, the Blackburn Lab, which will now, of course, she's moved to La Jolla, University of California, Mount Sinai, Scripps, Duke, and our center. And some of the research is just beginning to come out. We're looking at inflammatory markers, we're looking at microbiome. The indications are that what we saw with our first study is actually going to be magnified manyfold with this study, because it includes other ways of intervention. I should go back to this slide. You see this vagus nerve, it comes from the midbrain, and it goes to your heart, it goes to your lungs, it goes to your microbiome, where it influences the activity of the microbiome. The microbiome then puts out short-chain fatty acids and influences tryptophan metabolism that influences mood and cognition and perception that feeds back. So this is what bioelectrical medicine will be about. In fact, I want to introduce two of my colleagues here, Saran and Lindsay, who's a cognitive neuroscientist, and we're meeting with various people to see the technologies that actually will come out of this research, including small devices that can stimulate the vagus nerve based on our experience with yoga and meditation. Looking at the effects of Ayurvedic herbs on not only antioxidant effects, but also on the human genome. This is a very popular herb in Ayurveda, and this is the effect on upregulation of genes and downregulation of genes. And finally, we have a study just published looking at people who kept a gratitude journal. This was just published in a journal from Columbia University, and experiencing gratitude actually influenced the inflammatory markers and decreased something called leaky gut. So when people are stressed, their gut enzymes leak into the circulation and they cause damage. Keeping a simple gratitude journal decreased leaky gut, inflammatory markers in patients with heart failure. So, and this is how self-regulatory mechanisms of yoga can also act on different parts of the body. This has been our research over the years. This is some of the current projects that we're doing. A study on breast cancer survivors, study of well-being in our own staff because they practice these techniques, looking at the pineal gland, looking at functional MRIs on the pineal and relationship to the microbiome. This, of course, doesn't speak to other aspects of well-being, like career well-being, social well-being, physical well-being, financial well-being, community well-being. But there are algorithms that can track all these. And so the next step would be to create a well-being index that actually extends to countries. So this is a map of different countries in various stages of well-being. Denmark is number 1. The United States here is number 13, but has actually slipped to 15. The big problem is that as we go down the scale, and we're so proud that India is doing well and China is doing well, but actually it is not. There are a few people who are doing well. Most of the people in these countries are still suffering immensely, and there is such extreme disparity that the future doesn't seem that bright unless we take responsibility for improving the well-being of the entire planet. There's going to be all kinds of problems. In our experience, these are the 6 drivers of change: good content, physical space, virtual space technology, use selectively, metrics, products and services. So with your permission, I'll show you a last video of an app that is in development that actually uses this idea to help people create well-being in their lives and create social networks of well-being itself. This is still in development, but we can show the trailer. It's 2 minutes. And Saran and Lindsay are helping us. joyful, energetic body, loving, compassionate heart, reflective, alert mind, lightness of being.